If my calculations are correct, when this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're going to see some serious shit. Yes, we're on to my number 6 favourite film of all time, which is Back to the Future. This is a film that nobody seems to have a bad word about, and it's the kind of film that you never really get tired of watching. There is a purity to it. It's like pure enjoyment. And yeah, it's also very cleverly written and very cleverly directed, and it's a really watchable film which appeals to most people, hence why it's so popular after all this time. The theme and the score and the characters are all iconic. I do like how it's directed in such a way that often it's the little details that add an extra layer to something or make for some good jokes. Just at the beginning, over the opening credits, the camera's moving around Doc Brown's laboratory, and it shows you a whole lot of things, not just the obvious signs that nobody's been there for a while, but also like newspaper headlines and things that show you a bit of a background and create the image of Doc as this mad scientist. And then Marty gets there and his skateboard rolls along the floor to this box of plutonium that's hidden under the desk. There's lots of things that the movie doesn't need to spell out. It just lets you take them all in. Like when you look around Hill Valley in 1985 and you can see just how run down it is, and then compare that to how it is when Marty goes back to 1955 and there's much more colour and more liveliness. And you see how some things have stayed constant through time, like this campaign car going around the square for the mayor talking about re-election and progress, exactly like how it was in 1985, only for a different mayor. And then how we see the younger version of Biff Tannen in the diner saying pretty much the exact same things to George as he did when we first saw him in 1985. There's one quite good joke where after Marty arrives in 1955, people notice that he's wearing a vest and ask him whether it's a life jacket or something. And then when he gets to Doc Brown's house and Doc is trying to use this mind-reading machine on him, he says, "You want me to make a donation to the Coast Guard?" And while there is a lot of exposition and explaining, particularly at the beginning and particularly with how the time machine works, it all manages to be very interesting. Now the characters play a really big role in making the film work, particularly the two leads, Marty McFly and Doc Brown. Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd are just really brilliant. Marty kind of looks like this classic Zach Morris cool kid, and he definitely stands out among his family of depressed losers, but he's not really a bad boy despite what the principal says to him. We see that he has limited confidence in some ways, like with his band. And Doc Brown as well looks like this classic mad scientist with his wild hair and his wild entrance in the DeLorean with lots of smoke everywhere. He has his weird quirks like referring to the school dance as a rhythmic ceremonial ritual, and later on how he builds this entire model of the town square to demonstrate to Marty how he's going to send him back to the future, and he says, "Sorry about the crudity of this model, I didn't have time to build it to scale or paint it." But there are also other sides to him, like his moral ambiguity with dealing with the Libyans to get plutonium. So the film begins with spending quite a bit of time in 1985 setting stuff up, and it's around 17 minutes in that we get to the good stuff with the time machine, when it gets really interesting. And so Marty ends up getting in the DeLorean and time travelling back to 1955, and from then on it's kind of a classic story of returning home. The voyage and return, one of the 7 basic plots, only involving time travel. I do like how it doesn't have to waste a lot of time convincing the 1955 Doc Brown that all this is real. It manages to get it across quite quickly. When Doc Brown asks him who's president in 1985, I was thinking, wow, what if this movie was remade and they were saying about who's president in 2017? Doc would probably have a hard time accepting that. But then the film manages to generate some extra conflict very well. Obviously in time travel stories, going back to the past can end up being very precarious, and so just by pushing one person out of the way of a car, Marty ends up jeopardising his entire existence and has to sort that out. And just the concept of a teenage boy going back in time and meeting his parents when they were his age has quite a lot of good potential. Particularly how it allows Marty to see his parents as people, which is something that a lot of young people kind of struggle to do with their parents. He sees that George, his dad, has a lack of confidence like he does, and he sees his mum, Lorraine, being flirty with him and then panicking when she thinks her mother is going to be there. The progression that George goes through with Marty's help is really good, and I like how he takes this nerdy approach to it, like writing stuff down that Marty's telling him and trying to be all suave when he comes into the diner. So then we get to the climax, and everything from the dance onwards is brilliant. There's some great tension where it looks like Marty might have failed in bringing his parents together and he starts to actually disappear. It gets a very cool moment where he plays Johnny B. Good on stage and apparently inspires Chuck Berry. And then we get to the sequence at the clock tower itself, which is absolutely fantastic. There's just this few minutes of non-stop tension where the car won't start and all the wires are falling apart and Doc's trying to climb across the clock face to put all the wires back together, and one gets stuck on his trouser leg. And then when he puts one in, he pulls another one out, and it's only at the last second that things finally come together and you can let out a breath. It is interesting how you're able to create all this tension, and yet there's it's quite personal stakes. It's not like world changing. It's just about this one character who needs to get home and has this one chance to do it. I have to admit that watching this film again, it does raise quite a few weird questions, particularly with the time travel aspect. It is difficult to do a time travel story without creating some paradoxes. For example, as far as George is aware, he was visited by an alien named Darth Vader from planet Vulcan, so what's he going to think when he actually sees Star Wars and Star Trek? Is he going to think they ripped him off, or that aliens visited them too? And then what about the Libyans who attacked Doc and Marty? Did they die when their van crashes? Because we never see them bothering Doc again. And then in spite of the changes that Marty makes to the timeline, a whole lot of it remains quite stable. He's living in the same house, he's still got the same girlfriend, he's been doing some of the same things, and his siblings look exactly the same. I mean, based on how conception works, if you went back in time to before you were conceived and just went up to your father and gave him a nudge, it would probably result in a completely different baby. And I think it would have been funny if Marty had gotten back and he's found that only one parent was in his house and he asked where the other one was, and his brother or sister were like, Marty, Mom and Dad got divorced 4 years ago. That was when Dad realised you look exactly like this guy that Mom had a crush on in high school, and it raised a lot of awkward questions. Now obviously the ending with the DeLorean actually flying away, that makes it a sequel quite natural. I don't know if they knew for certain that there was going to be a sequel at that point, but it would have been pretty terrible if there hadn't been. And I do really love the sequels as well, and I like this film in context for the whole trilogy. But ultimately this one is the best individual film. I find I have to be in like certain moods to watch the Back to the Future Part 2 and Back to the Future 3, whereas this one I can just put in any time. So now I'm halfway through my top 10 favourite films, and I'm really looking forward to talking about the next 5. I mean, obviously I love the films that I've already talked about, but now we're getting into the ones that I feel a real special affection for, so it's really going to be good. So that'll be coming soon, and thank you for watching once again.